Ever find yourself reaching for your phone just out of habit?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like it's an extension of your hand. It makes me think about how we got here. You know how life used to be?
Totally.
I mean, I can remember when rotary phones were the big thing.
Wow.
Imagine that.
A simpler time, baby.
Right. And that's what we're diving into today, exploring life before smartphones, laptops, all that.
Right before constant connection.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got some fascinating source material. Really sheds light on how people lived, worked, played back then.
Interesting.
Yeah. Let's start with childhood. I think that's always a good place to begin.
Makes sense.
So the source paints this picture of kids entertaining themselves without screens. Can you believe it?
It's kind of hard to imagine now.
I know, right? They were out building forts, playing tag, using their imaginations. It's a pretty stark contrast to how so many kids spend their free time today.
Absolutely. I mean, with so much technology at their fingertips, it's easy to forget.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting to think about the impact on development,
Yeah, like cognitive development.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The source mentions board games like Monopoly being popular.
Ah, the classics.
Those kinds of games, they require strategy negotiation, thinking ahead.
Skills that maybe aren't as emphasized in a world of, instant gratification and digital everything.
Yeah, perhaps.
Do you think there's a connection there?
It's certainly possible. I mean, even something like building with Legos.
Oh, yeah.
It took time, patience. You had to use your imagination to create something from scratch.
And no instructions, just pure creativity.
Right.
It makes you wonder if that kind of play had a lasting impact on those kids.
That you would have to. The source highlights how this lack of constant entertainment forced them to be more resourceful.
And more creative.
Exactly. They had to come up with their own games, their own solutions.
Engaging with the physical world in a much more direct way.
Definitely.
So, okay, we've established that kids were out there building their brains the analog way.
The old-fashioned way.
But what about adults?
That's a good question.
I mean, the source talks about how socializing was completely different.
Yeah, I was just reading about that.
Imagine a world where you couldn't just text someone to make plans.
What?
You actually had to call them.
On a landline.
Or even better, knock on their door.
Spontaneous visits.
Exactly. It's a foreign concept now.
It is.
The source really emphasizes that face-to-face interaction, visiting friends and family.
Going to parties, gathering at local spots.
Not just fleeting encounters either, but real opportunities to connect.
Build relationships.
Yes, strengthen those community bonds.
Right.
It's interesting because the source also touches on the rise of hobbies.
So yeah, like gardening, knitting, playing sports.
All those things.
I love that.
And it wasn't just about passing the time.
Right.
These activities provided a sense of accomplishment.
They encouraged creativity.
And often involved a social element as well.
Definitely.
Do you think there's something there for us today, in our always-on, hyper-connected world?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the source is suggesting that these offline pursuits offered a break.
A break from what?
From the constant mental stimulation.
Yeah.
It was a slower, more mindful approach to life.
Like a reset button for the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's funny we were talking about that slower pace of life.
Yeah.
The course also makes a point about how this shift to a digital world impacted different parts of the world in different ways.
Oh, right. Like how the source contrasted developed countries.
Yeah, where those devices became super common for all sorts of things.
And developing countries where they were often used for more essential things.
Exactly.
Like banking and healthcare.
And even education.
Wow.
So in some parts of the world, people were posting selfies, checking emails.
The usual.
But in other parts, those same devices were providing access to vital services.
Really highlights that technology isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Definitely not. Its impact depends on the context.
And access, of course.
For sure. What really stood out to you from this section?
I think what I found fascinating was how in many developing nations, mobile tech became this tool for empowerment.
For social change, even.
The source gave that example of farmers.
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly they could access market prices for their crops.
Giving them more bargaining power.
Right? It wasn't just about convenience anymore.
It was about leveling the playing field.
Such a powerful point.
It is. It's easy to get caught up in that whole narrative.
Of technology being a distraction.
Yeah. But the source reminds us that it can also be a force for good.
Connecting people to resources and opportunities.
That they might not have had otherwise.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It really underscores the importance of considering the bigger picture.
The societal implications.
It's not just the positive, but the negative as well.
We can't just focus on the shiny new gadgets.
Right. We have to think about how they're being used.
And who's benefiting from them.
Okay, so we've explored how life functioned before constant connection,
From childhood to adulthood.
and even the global impact of this tech shift.
A pretty comprehensive look.
But let's bring it back to the present for a second.
Okay.
We can't exactly unplug and go back to rotary phones, can we?
I don't think so.
The source isn't advocating for that either.
Right, it's not about romanticizing the past.
It's about learning from it.
Exactly.
So what are some of those lessons? What can we take away from this and actually apply to our lives today?
Well, the source seems to suggest that there's value in rediscovering some of those habits.
The ones that thrived in a less connected era?
Exciting.
Like what? Give us some specifics.
Well, for one, we could be more intentional about making time for offline activities.
Okay.
Things that allow us to disconnect from the digital world.
Like pursuing hobbies,
Spending time in nature,
having actual face-to-face conversations.
all of that.
It's like hitting that reset button.
Giving our brains a break from all the stimulation.
It seems like more and more people are realizing they need to unplug.
Even if it's just for a little bit.
Exactly. And maybe it's also about being more mindful of how we actually use technology.
Instead of letting it control us.
Using it as a tool to enhance our lives.
That's a great point. It's all about balance.
Right. Embracing the good without letting it consume us.
I think so.
Yeah.
But you know what really struck me about all this?
What's that?
How much our idea of normal has changed.
In such a short amount of time?
What we think is totally normal today
Right.
could seem bizarre to future generations.
It's true. I mean, we think we're so advanced,
Yeah,
but who knows what's coming next?
it's humbling to think about.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What will people in the future think of us?
It's pretty wild to think about. Like, imagine trying to explain social media to someone from 100 years ago.
I know, right? They'd be like, what's a selfie?
Exactly. The source really encourages that kind of thinking, you know?
About how quickly things change.
And how what seems normal to us now could be completely foreign to future generations.
Like, what if they think our obsession with documenting everything is just weird?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or what if they can't believe we used to have all these separate devices for everything?
Oh, yeah. Like, imagine explaining a smartphone to someone who only knows rotary phones.
Exactly. It might seem totally primitive to them.
And clunky.
Right. What if they have technology integrated right into their lives?
Like their bodies. Now you're getting futuristic on me.
Well, hey, it's fun to speculate.
It is, but seriously, it just shows how much things can change.
And how our perspective can shift.
What we consider cutting edge today could be obsolete tomorrow.
Exactly. And that's one of the things I love about looking back at the past.
Gives you a fresh perspective.
Makes you question your assumptions about what's possible.
This whole deep dive has been a real trip.
I know, right? We've covered so much ground.
From childhood play to adult socializing to the global impact of this tech shift.
And we've seen how, even though technology has changed so much,
Some things remain constant.
the need for connection, for one.
Exactly. And the power of human ingenuity.
I think this source did a great job of highlighting those themes.
It really did. It wasn't just about romanticizing the past.
Right. It was about learning from it.
And figuring out how we can apply those lessons to our lives today.
Because let's face it, we can't go back in time.
But we can make conscious choices about how we interact with technology.
And shape our future.
Exactly. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good to me.
But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Oh yeah, what's that?
As you navigate this digital world we live in, remember the things we've talked about today.
The importance of balance.
The value of offline activities.
The power of human connection.
Maybe put down your phone for a few hours and engage in something you love.
Or pick up the phone and actually call a friend.
Instead of just texting, you
Yeah.
know, make a real connection.
Those are great ideas. It's all about being mindful.
That's it in a nutshell. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.